Hi again! Welcome back to App Authors. In this video, I'll be introducing you to the process of app design. In the overall app creating process, this step comes after thinking of an idea and brainstorming. If you don't have an idea for an app you'd like to create, I recommend checking out my brainstorming video first. Alright, let's get going. How do you design an app? Well, there are a few ways to go about doing this, but the best way is to use a pencil and paper and start mapping out your ideas. It's really tempting to dive right into a computer or tablet and start working on your app, but it can be very overwhelming to try to start on the computer without having any idea of what your app will look like. We're going to work together today to create a map, so when you do get on the computer or tablet, you'll know exactly where to start. So let's talk about paper prototyping. What is it, and how can you use it to build apps? First of all, what's a prototype? A prototype is basically the first version of something. It's kind of like a rough draft of a paper. There are usually lots of prototypes of anything before you get a final product. Think about your favorite app. The way it looks and runs now is much different from when it was first developed. It was first prototyped and then redesigned lots of times. So now you know what a prototype is. A paper prototype is a first attempt at making something with paper. Remember when I said we would be making a map of how to create your app on the computer? Your paper prototype will be kind of like your map. For your first app, try to use only 4 screens. I know, that doesn't seem like much, but challenge yourself to use only 4. If you can make 4 screens, easy peasy, then you can move on to make as many as you want. But start with 4. Now I'll show you a couple of different ways to make your own paper prototypes. The simplest way to plan your app is to use note cards and draw out each of your screens, including any buttons, drop-downs, or menus. As you work through your paper prototype, it's important to include as much detail as possible. Note cards can give you a lot of flexibility to design your screens however you want. Here you can see the screens that I designed for an app about my favorite local parks. On each screen, I made sure to include all of the text, buttons, and pictures I wanted to include in my final app. If you're having a hard time designing screens from scratch, you can always use a template. In the App Authors Toolkit, I'll include blank screens and pre-made buttons. You can cut and paste these elements onto your screens for quicker paper prototyping. Here is another paper prototype I made for an app where users can vote for their predictions about the Oscars. As you can see, I included home buttons, drop-down menus, text, and buttons for voting. It can be intimidating to start your first prototype, so here are a few tips to consider as you get started. Try closing your eyes and imagining what your app idea would look like once you click on the app icon. What is the very first screen that pops up? Are there directions for how to use this app? Is there a main menu? What colors do you want to use? These basic ideas can be helpful places to start when you make your first design. Also, keep in mind that for each user input, say button clicking for example, something has to happen on the app. Consider this when making your prototype. Do each of the buttons lead to something in your app, or do the buttons just lead to blank screens? Once your first drafts of your screens are designed, the next step is to decide how users will move from one screen to the next. This process is called wireframing. A wireframe is like a blueprint for an app. Wireframes tell app creators how apps are laid out and how users navigate between screens. To make a wireframe for your app, you can try this wireframing template from the App Authors Toolkit. You can also just draw arrows between your screens so that you know how they interact with each other. Here you can see my wireframe for my Oscar Picks app. Under each screen, I listed exactly which buttons I need to include. I also color-coded arrows from each of the buttons so that I will know how to lay out my app once I start coding. Now you know how paper prototyping works, and you've also learned what a wireframe is. Now try creating your own map, or prototype, and blueprint, or wireframe, for your app. To make it into a challenge, try to see if your friends can use your paper prototyped app without asking you any questions. If it makes sense to them, that means your app is user-friendly. For now, it's time to get to work on your paper prototypes and wireframes. Remember, your first try shouldn't be your last. The reason you're making these plans on paper in the first place is so that you can easily make changes. Once you feel confident that your plans are clear, user-friendly, and easy to understand, you're ready to start building your app.